This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video we're looking at one of the most overlooked turning points in the Beatles story, Paul McCartney's soundtrack to the 1966 film The Family Way. It can seem like a footnote, a small score written during the band's first real break from touring, but behind the scenes it led to an unspoken misunderstanding that John Lennon never quite got over. Something that, according to Yoko, niggled him for years. In this video, we'll explore exactly what happened, why it mattered, and how a small, largely forgotten film score marked the first split in the Lennon-McCartney partnership. The Beatles' final tour ended on the 29th of August 1966, with a show at San Francisco's Candlestick Park. After 4 relentless years on the road, the touring chapter of their career was over, and for the first time since 1962, the 4 Beatles went in completely different directions. John travelled to Spain to film How I Won the War. George flew to India to study sitar with Ravi Shankar. Ringo stayed at home with his family. Paul remained in London, drifting deeper into the city's emerging underground scene. It was during this creative rebirth that Paul was approached about contributing music to a forthcoming British film called The Family Way. It was presented as a light commitment, essentially a theme for the opening titles rather than a full orchestral score. As Paul later put it, I rang Nems and said I'd like to write a film theme. John was away filming, so I had time. At the time, he saw nothing unusual in it. He didn't view the assignment as a solo project or as a step away from the partnership. It simply felt like something interesting to do during a lull in the Beatles' schedule. But the decision, innocent as it seemed, would soon have consequences neither he nor John anticipated.
This is a great mystery.
The Family Way was a small British comedy drama released at the end of 1966, adapted from the stage play All in Good Time and directed by the Bolting brothers, Roy and John. American viewers will recognise Hayley Mills, already a major Disney star, who appears alongside her real-life father John Mills in a role far removed from her familiar screen image. The film centres on newlyweds Jenny Piper and Arthur Fitton, who find themselves unable to consummate their marriage. It sounds like farce, but the film treats the situation with sensitivity and a distinctly northern realism. Arthur still lives with his parents in a cramped terraced house, and the lack of privacy, combined with family expectations, places relentless pressure on the couple. John Mills and Marjorie Rhodes portray Arthur's parents, representing traditional attitudes, while the young couple struggle with embarrassment, anxiety, and the scrutiny of their close-knit working-class community. It belongs to the tail end of the British kitchen sink tradition of the mid-1960s, domestic, socially observant, and focused on ordinary lives. Crucially, that domestic tone shaped what the producers wanted from the music. They weren't looking for sweeping orchestral drama, but small, intimate themes, exactly the kind of challenge that appealed to Paul.
Oh, hi, chum.
Take me to your leader.
Take me to your leader? You must be kidding with that corny line. And now a word from our leader.
If you're a musician, a filmmaker, or someone working on any creative project, you'll know how important it is to have a place online that actually reflects what you do. Something that looks professional, loads quickly, and helps people find you. Squarespace gives you everything you need to build that from day one. You can choose from a library of award-winning templates and customize them to fit your style, whether you're showcasing your work, running a blog, or building your portfolio. And if you want to get up and running quickly, Squarespace's Blueprint AI can generate a personalized website based on your goals, your industry, and the voice of your brand. Squarespace also gives you analytics that are genuinely useful. So why not give it a try and head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/parlogram to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. John already knew that Paul had agreed to work on the film. What he didn't realise was that Paul intended to go ahead without him. In a 1966 interview recorded on the set of How I Won the War, John casually mentioned, we've got music to write when we get back, and Paul's just signed us up to write music for a film. Signed us up, not signed himself up. John believed, or at least hoped, that it was another Lennon-McCartney collaboration waiting for him when he returned from Spain. So when Paul moved ahead alone, John wasn't openly angry, but as Yoko later explained, he took it personally. He brooded, stayed quiet, and kept the whole thing to himself, and that silence became the real problem. By the time John returned from Spain, Paul had already begun work on the score. He improvised the central theme, later titled Love in the Open Air, and sang the idea to George Martin, who then expanded and orchestrated it. Martin later recalled, Paul couldn't score, but he had very good ideas. He wanted the sound of a northern brass band. Together, they crafted a short, gentle score built around two ideas: a romantic theme and a brass band march rooted in working-class northern life. The music ran for just 24 minutes, but emotionally it carried more weight than Paul realised, because when John came home, he said nothing, and Paul assumed everything was fine. The issue would only become clear years later. While the emotional story was unfolding, the music itself came together quickly. Paul would sketch themes at the piano, and George would take those fragments away and return with full orchestrations. The main theme, later titled Love in the Open Air, began as a brief phrase Paul improvised. Martin then developed it into several variations, each reflecting a different mood. For a score lasting barely 20 minutes, it covers a surprisingly wide emotional range. Much of its character came from Paul's childhood memories. His father had played trumpet in a dance band, and Paul remembered hearing brass bands in Liverpool parks. The Family Way gave him a chance to draw directly on that sound world. Although The Family Way is a short score, it covers more ground than many expect. At the centre is a simple waltz-like theme that appears in several guises, supported by restrained brass and strings that anchor the film firmly in its northern setting. Nothing here is grand or showy. The music is modest, understated and distinctly British, exactly what the film required. In hindsight, it also shows Paul beginning to explore musical colours beyond the usual Beatles framework, an early step towards the broader composing style he would develop later. The recording sessions were completed at CTS Studios in November 1966, and George Martin assumed he would conduct any single released from the score. Instead, Decca, who held the soundtrack rights, issued a version of Love in the Open Air under the name The Tudor Minstrels. Although Martin conducted the recording, his name didn't appear on the label, despite having written and arranged the music. Frustrated, Martin booked Abbey Road on the 15th of December 1966 and recorded his own version under his own name, releasing it on the same day as Decca's. For a brief moment, two competing versions of the same McCartney theme were on sale, each arranged by the same man. Neither charted, but Martin had made his point. Years later, Yoko's comments helped clarify what John never expressed at the time. Paul's decision to take on the project alone niggled him, not about the music itself, but about being left out. This is an important distinction. John didn't resent The Family Way as a piece of work. He resented the fact that Paul had gone ahead without him. It was the first time either of them had created something substantial outside the Beatles, and Paul had done it without discussion. Years later, Paul would say, if I'd known John was upset, I would have asked him to join me. But John never said he was upset. Instead, he grew quiet, and that silence created a wedge, small but sharp. Sensing something was wrong, Paul did something generous and unintentionally revealing. He added John's name to the royalty check. I didn't want him to feel left out, he later explained. To Paul, it was a gesture of unity. To John, it felt like something else entirely. According to Yoko, John wasn't pleased. He believed Paul was paying him off rather than acknowledging him as an equal partner. Paul's attempt to smooth things over only confirmed the hurt. This moment reveals an early pattern that would repeat over the next few years. Paul acting from enthusiasm and momentum, John interpreting those actions as rejection, and neither man expressing what they truly felt. The Family Way premiered in London on the 18th of December 1966 and went on general release in Britain in January 1967. Reviews of the film were mixed, but the response to the music was consistently warm. Critics described the score as gentle, tasteful, and surprisingly effective, even when they were less convinced by the film as a whole. The soundtrack LP followed shortly after. In the UK, it was released by Decca Records in January 1967, credited to Paul McCartney, and featuring orchestral performances arranged and conducted by George Martin. It was a low-key release, modestly promoted and sold in relatively small numbers. The associated singles failed to chart. In the United States, the album appeared later in 1967 on London Records, Decca's American affiliate. With the film little seen in the US and Paul not yet established as a solo artist, the soundtrack attracted minimal attention and also failed to chart. The project might have failed completely were it not for an unexpected development later that year. Paul's main theme won the Ivor Novello Award for Best Instrumental Theme of 1967, a prestigious honour for a piece of music he'd composed almost casually. Within the Lennon-McCartney dynamic, the award carried particular weight. At a moment when John was moving into more experimental territory, it was Paul's side project that received formal recognition. Once again, the symbolism seemed larger than the work itself. At the time, The Family Way was regarded as a minor diversion, peripheral to the Beatles' main story. In hindsight, that modest reception only sharpens its significance, both musically and emotionally. To understand the emotional impact on John, it helps to consider where he was in late 1966. He'd endured controversy, exhaustion, and isolation while filming How I Won the War. While he was away, the creative world he relied on had shifted slightly without him. The Lennon-McCartney partnership had been his anchor, and any suggestion of drift struck a deeper nerve. Paul's independent work implied, however subtly, that he could move forward creatively on his own. Yoko said later that John felt hurt but couldn't show it. To him, showing hurt meant showing weakness, so he hid it, and that unspoken hurt gradually turned into resentment. The Family Way shows that the partnership was not as unshakable as it appeared from the outside. Paul always maintained that he never intended the project as a slight. He assumed that because John was away, there was no expectation of collaboration, and he never imagined John would feel excluded. That's why later he added John's name to the royalty check, not as a payoff, but as an act of loyalty. Unfortunately, without explanation, it was interpreted in precisely the opposite way. Both men were acting on assumptions the other didn't share, a pattern that would return repeatedly as pressures on the band increased. Today, The Family Way is often treated as a curiosity, but its real significance lies in what it reveals about the Beatles in late 1966. It marked the first time Paul took on a creative project alone, and the first time John felt left behind. There was no argument, no confrontation, just silence. None of this caused an immediate crisis. The Beatles went on to make some of their greatest work in 1967, but The Family Way did mark a shift in how the two central figures in the band viewed their partnership. It shows how easily a partnership could be unsettled, not by what was said, but by what wasn't. A tiny moment in a huge story, but one that foreshadowed everything to come. If you enjoyed this deep dive, feel free to give us a like and a sub, and I'll see you again next weekend with something else. But that's all for this one, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.